Hello there, and welcome to Labour Media. Political discourse on the internet, whilst existing since near its inception, only continues to pluralise with each passing year. One of the ways this discourse has expanded is through the political compass test, a site that asks a series of questions in order to plot the user's personal political standing onto a compass. The compass has two axes, an economic axis and a statism/social axis. We'll talk more about that conflation later, and has four quadrants. The southern quadrants are libertarian left and right, whilst the northern two are the authoritarian left and right. It's typically assumed that the authoritarian left is indicative of orthodox Marxist ideas such as Marxist-Leninism or Juche, whilst the libertarian left represents democratic socialism or anarcho-communism. The authoritarian right typically encompasses fascists, liberals, conservatives, and neoliberals, with the libertarian right including right libertarians, minarchists, anarcho-capitalists, etc. These interpretations are partially based on what the site itself posits, but are also based on the interpretation of the slew of memes surrounding the political compass. Its popularity is something unto itself, especially with the fandom around J-Reg Centricide series. Just image search political compass and you'll find an endless parade of interpretations as to who fits where and what ideologies fit where, and often some interesting results. The test is owned by Pace News Limited and supposedly created by journalist Wayne Brittenden. I say supposedly because this monolith of internet politics is surprisingly mysterious. Despite being the subject of memes, political analysis, and with influence stretching beyond the internet to where many politics classes, including my own, ask their students to take the test, its history is defined by the vague, and little is known about its creator or Pace News. No matter, our analysis will be based purely on the test itself and its inefficacy. There are many critiques about the political compass test. Relevant questions, obtuse movement in relation to questions asked, and an undercurrent of bias in the test. Criticism is almost as prolific as the test itself. Find the video breathing in its general direction without some of the above notes are theirs yet. However, though the reasons for its detractors are many, today I'm going to focus on only a few factors, mainly the inadequacies of the two axes and the inadequacies of the questions insofar as they relate to the actual divide between economic right and left. Both of these points convene into my greater argument that the political compass does not address the material and present political spectrum. Well, I see no reason to delay the point. Onwards and upwards. So let's start with the two axes. The economic left-right axis is fair enough. We'll find it riddled with problems later. However, the y-axis represents both statism and social values. Statism refers to the level of state that exists, whether that should be a large state with fully nationalised industry, a small state that only provides some services, or no state at all, with everything being run by communities in the case of anarcho-communism, or everything being governed by one non-aggression principle in the case of anarcho-capitalism. Social values refer to the level of progressivism. This encompasses issues such as women and minority rights, gun control, abortion, etc. Now, it's a good idea to separate these axes because whilst leftist economics and progressive values often go in tandem, this is by no means a rule. Indeed, there are those who follow left economics but progressive social values, and vice versa. The level of statism also differs between economic lines. However, statism and social values do not conflate either, so it's absurd that this y-axis refers to both statism and social values. Whilst regressive social values could indeed be seen as more authoritarian, so-called authoritarian states do not necessarily have regressive social values. The USSR, for instance, was a very centralised state with sizable military and defence. However, they were also much more progressive than the myriad other states of the era. Considering how often right libertarians get along with garden variety fascists, you can also see that having a small state isn't always aligned with progressivism. The effects of this is not at all negligible. I'm an orthodox Marxist, so you might expect me to end up in the off-left area of the test. However, I end up in the lib-left quadrant every time because I have socially progressive values, as do most other orthodox Marxists. This makes this top quadrant utterly superfluous, and we'll talk more about that later. Furthermore, someone who has socially progressive values but believes in the free market or in private ownership is not necessarily an anarcho-capitalist, not only because the ideology is fundamentally incoherent and makes no bloody sense, but also because this is a profoundly liberal view, which would make more sense in the blue given the statism needed for liberal capitalism. See the problem here? Conflating the social and statist axis just makes for confusion and relegates two-fourths of the compass to nonsensicality. We'll talk more about that later, but first, we must discuss the other axis and its inadequacy. The political compass test is indisputably focused on social questions, as is much debate in the Western world at least. Out of the 62 questions, 40 are based on either social values or statist values. This is following the trend much proliferated in the 2010s, and still on today to a lesser extent, where the top consideration for political debates are the same social questions, which are incredibly important to face, even if many are Americanised, i.e. gun control and the death penalty, which are both discussed in debate classes here in the UK, despite being far less relevant to our political climate. Economic questions, however, often get dumbed down to merely socialism versus capitalism, where socialism is just when rich people share, and when government happens, and capitalism is when Arthur Burling, of which are true, of course. The political compass exemplifies this. The test examples use figures as extreme as Stalin hardly address the economics that fully distinguish the right and left. I think the best way to draw the comparison between left and right economics is common ownership versus private ownership. Capitalism involves private ownership over the means of production by a capitalist, whilst left-wing economics involves common ownership, whether that be by a state, by a community, or by a cooperative of workers. This is a massive simplification, yes, but I think it'd be interesting to look at how many questions on the political compass address this divide. How many refer to private versus common ownership? I could only find about 6 questions that address this, and only 2 that are non-negotiable on the right. There's a lot of talk about this test having a leftist bias. I think I might have to agree, because the left on this test is very much politically noted from its material form. Of course, everyone who's on the left is going to be an extremist, going to go about having a cheeky revolution. It would help to have propositions such as profit is theft, or business is best run by its workers than by a board of directors. Questions with answers that would concretely cement someone's position on the economic spectrum. In general, a greater quantity of questions concerning economy would be very welcome. Combining the compass's misunderstanding of the economic axis and its conflated social/statist axis, what do we get? A thoroughly nonsensical portrayal of the political spectrum that materially exists, specifically with the authoritarian left and the libertarian right. As I've mentioned, thanks not only to the conflated y-axis, but the mismanaged x-axis, these quadrants are given much more room than what they actually constitute. The authoritarian left doesn't really match what it's meant to represent, and the libertarian right, whilst certainly a growing movement, particularly in North America, I think it's more a subset than a quadrant unto itself. I might be wrong about this. Maybe there's a lot of influence in countries I haven't really looked into. What can certainly be said is that the conflation of the y-axis makes the section much more liberals plus than anything. This leaves us with only really lib left and north right, the quadrants wherein most figures and ideologies are plotted. However, due to the economic axis, they're still confusing. Just look at this video by TLDR News, link below, and just how many people fall into lib left. What it means to be economic left so watered down as to be oblique and not entirely useful to the purposes of accurate political data. In conclusion, the political compass test is not very good at all. This isn't a new opinion, but I like to think I've added to the critique, given how the problematic axes of the test aren't as often talked about. That doesn't mean it's not useful. It's a fun test to take with friends, and it's interesting to see your results, as with many similar online tests. However, there's certainly better ones out there, such as 8 values and 9 axes. These aren't perfect, they have many similar problems, but they're more nuanced on the political compass. Just be sure to take them with a grain of salt. They can be helpful for finding out and analysing your beliefs, but only you can decide what you believe in. Interrogate your beliefs, inform yourself, don't be a bloody fascist, don't make a political belief your personality, and make a decision for yourself. Thank you for watching Christ on the Bike by Vocal Cords. As per the norm, the transcript for this video will be in the description. Subtitles are also available for my last video on social democracy, but I'll probably add subtitles for the first episode before I get around to this one. I need to rest there will be an outtakes video with this one, just like the last 2, because there was some slip-ups, mate. There was bloody palaver. This has been Labour Media, and remember, Labour conquers all.